Hi everyone. So I represent John Finance Limited, and John Finance has been fortunate enough where they have a series of joint ventures. So to pick just one would be a little bit difficult. My favorite is Cranes Guyana, and I'll leave Mr. C to talk about that one. I'll talk about our first one when we started in the oil and gas. This was pre-local content days. And when we started out, we didn't even think about a joint venture. It wasn't in our scope. It wasn't what we were thinking at the time. We saw a need as part of the shipping industry and owning a wharf in Georgetown that with the arrival of oil and gas, we would need to supply them with a port, a shore base as it's called, in order for them to land their products, everything that would be needed to come into the country for oil and gas. This was back in 2014, 2015. So our joint venture actually started with us seeing a need on our own and trying to fill that need on our own. Unfortunately, as we started and we were going through, realized that the capital we would need for this joint venture is outside of our reach. So we would need a partner. And we didn't know who to partner with. We didn't have any idea. But we were fortunate enough that we were approached by a company that was very similar to us in terms of it was a family-owned company. Their culture was similar to ours, and it turned out to be like a match made in heaven. And this was with Edison Schwess Offshore. They had come to Guyana as they service shore bases all over the world in oil and gas, looking for what opportunities lay here. And with their arrival, they were recommended to us that, maybe talk to Joint Finance, they might be interested in a partnership. And that is how G-Port Inc. became what it is. So in that story, it wasn't where we were looking for a joint venture. A joint venture just kind of ended up being our solution. And the Local Content Act changed how we needed to approach, because we were already in partnership, and we just needed to, and the partnership was made from a mutual need, and the Local Content Act helped us mold our relationship to meet the needs where the Guyanese benefit more. So
Thank you very much, Dominic. And as you were referred to, Mr. C.
Thanks, Khalil, and thanks, team. I think the first thing that we need to probably do is to ask the organizers for an extended cocktail hour, given that we are running a bit behind schedule, right? I guess everybody's in agreement to that? So there we go. So I do have a long name, and hence the reason why they shortened it by calling me Mr. C. It took me a while to actually learn to spell the name. So anyhow, I'm the general manager for Munishwar Limited, so I've been there for about 4 years now. Basically, what Munishwar stands for is probably different from most companies here in Guyana today. We started, I think it's over 75 years ago, as a little retail business, and today we are a strong conglomerate providing services to many sectors. 34 years ago, we started the wharf operation, which is the shipping side of our business. That's when we acquired a facility from the government, wooden pier, 2 old forklifts. Today we got 7 stackers, cranes, and many other equipment to talk about. We represent 3 lines in Guyana: Maersk, MSC, and Tropical Lines, for those of us who are in the shipping industry. We also implemented, over the years, we implemented software to manage the operations. So we now have a terminal management software. So, you can call me up and ask me, where is your container in the yard? I can just type in a number and I can tell you exactly where it is. So we have sort of transformed and modernized the industry over the years. Both ourselves and John Finance are 2 competing businesses, strongly, fiercely competing business. I was told, I can't say I observed that. I was told that 34 years ago, when we started the operation, our next door neighbor, John Finance, was over the fence looking and see what we were doing. Today, we don't have to look over the fence. We have cameras focusing on each other. So I'll call Alan and say, Alan, the truck is blocking the yard, stuff like that. But over the years, we have recognized that there is a need for us to come together to enhance the shipping industry in Guyana, to transform the shipping industry in Guyana, as to say. Most of the facilities in the region, and probably, if not all in the region, I should say, they carry what we call cranes at the terminal, mobile harbor cranes or gantry cranes. Those cranes are used to load and offload the vessels. In our case, prior to Cranes Guyana Inc., we had the vessel crane that will offload the vessel and load the containers back on the vessel. That process is very slow. You get a productivity of maybe 8, 10 containers per hour. Good. Given the fact that this is the only port in Guyana that the crane will operate, very often the crane will fail because there is no maintenance of it, because it's not used in other facilities. Hence the reason why we looked at it and how we could actually change that. There's a guy called Tom Palink. He was the CEO for a company called CFS, Caribbean Feeder Service. And he's the one who made the change where we are today. Because both John Finance and Monishwar were not in speaking terms. How do I go and say, Alan, we need to buy a crane? Or Alan will come across and say, you know, Robin, we need to do this. It was not possible. So Tom bridged that gap by engaging John Finance and then subsequently engaging ourselves and back and forth until we opened the door and we were sitting around the table with John Finance, agreeing on the investment. That investment was funded by IDB to a total about $10 million US. And here we have 2 mobile harbor cranes being used to offload and to load containers from the vessels that come to Guyana. Outside of that, the quayside had to be developed to accommodate those mobile harbor cranes because each one is about 425 tons. So basically what happens, both ourselves and John Finance come together, invested about $6 million US in developing the quayside to accommodate the cranes. Those cranes have a lifting capacity at max 124 tons each. So maybe all of us in this room here can sit on a platform and we can just lift you and throw you overboard. Good? So that's what the board of Cranes Guyana taking 2 fiercely competing organizations, and we still compete by the way. The only thing that we collaborate on is the investment in the quayside development and the investment in those 2 mobile harbor cranes. The services that we provide to the lines, the services that we provide to our customers are distinct and competing. Good? I don't tell them my rates. Good? So that's one part of it. There are other joint ventures that Monishwar directly would have established over the years as well. Most of them are foreign-based, so we are into the tug business, we are into the barges business, we are into transportation. One of our partners sits right in this room with us here, Greg Biddle. We got logistics company, we got construction company, we got, I can't recall the names, probably about 10, 12 companies that we have established over the years. And I must say, some of the companies are fully owned subsidiaries of Monishwar, and some are partnership with foreign companies. And each one of those companies are profitable in its own rights. They can stand on their own financing platform. Good? So that's one part. There are other areas of collaboration that we are working with John Finance, and this has a bigger picture. I got to be very careful how much I disclose because I signed an NDA. There is a need for a deep water port for Guyana. And on many platforms, the president would have made that statement, that there is a need for a deep water port in Guyana. For those of us, again, who are in the import, export, and shipping sector, will understand during the peak season the challenges that we faced, particularly in the transshipment ports, Trinidad, Cartagena, Panama, etc. Those challenges impact cargo being received by us here in Guyana on a timely basis. And by the way, one of our stores has just received their last Christmas container for 2024 yesterday. So it tells you of the challenges that we face. Can we make a difference as partners, as Crane Guyana Inc? The answer is yes. So we are in the process of securing financing. We have gone a far way in the engagement with the financing institution to actually build a deep water port in Guyana. I will not say the location. We have gone a far way in terms of working with the government in identifying the area and come up with a development plan for it. We have a commitment to the government. Once we have signed off on those agreements, within 18 months, we should have the first 2 berths of that deepwater facility available for vessels to traverse Guyana and have transshipment done here rather than any other port in the Caribbean. So that's in a nutshell who we are, where we are, and where we are going as partners. The challenges that one faces in working with local companies is not something that you want to discuss and talk about all the time. These are 2 privately owned businesses that comes with different culture, different way of running, different way of management, etc. But it takes a lot to go around the table, sit down, and close those gaps. Is it doable? The short answer is yes. But you have to be committed to make it work. And I must say, both Monishwar Limited and John Finance are committed to see the development and transformation of the shipping sector in Guyana. Thanks.
Thank you very much, panel, for sharing with us what your JVs are engaged in and who your partners are. I want to ask another question. So, you know, a JV is a sort of a marriage. You know, you're looking for a partner, you find a partner, you're going to do some amount of due diligence. I don't know if I can ask Dr. Surendra, maybe, if we could start with you, to share with us how you identified your partner, what type of due diligence you did before you agreed that, yes, I will partner with you.
So the key aspect of this, as you're looking at what is it you're trying to fill. So there's a proposal from a client that you have to submit. And you have to figure out exactly what is your gap. And you have to reach out to your partner and make sure they are willing to work within that frame. So it's a challenge because it's not exactly we can open a directory and find this, right? So you reach out to your friends, you reach out and you do internet searches and you try to find people who are working in this space. Thankfully, you know, one of the things we learned when the oil and gas came here is that most of these companies are publicly traded. And so you can find a lot of information about them in the public domain as opposed to many Guyanese companies. Now, ExxonMobil, the client in this case, made it very clear that they wanted these relationships to be consistent with the local content laws. So the first question you ask your potential partner, here's the law. Are you happy and willing to work within that frame? And that has to be yes, otherwise you can't make any progress. Now, at the end of the day, remember, this is a business relationship, and everybody on a business level is going to try to get the upper hand. So that's when you need to rely upon your lawyers and your accountants to guide you into how you are going to structure this. And so what's unique about what we did is we created a separate incorporation entity for that. And the joint venture is very specific for that RFP. So we did that again with the guidance of our accountants and lawyers who said, if this, tell us what you want. And so when we tendered for this project, it was using this specific JV, and we shared that JV with the client, and we shared that JV with the Local Content Secretariat. So we made it clear to everybody this was going to be a document that we all had to be willing to live with. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Tukuran, if I can ask you, from NURES's perspective, in forming your entity and bringing in the partner, which is a consortium of 17, I believe, parties, how, if you could share how your group went about satisfying itself that, yes, this is the group we would like to partner with?
I think it was more, the group the consortium was already being built and put together. It's more of how we integrated the consortium into the entity, because NURES is present in over 60 countries over the world, so we are already working with partners in different other countries. So we had this experience before of working either as a sole entity or with partners in other regions, especially in oil and gas countries, where this local content is present in various proportions. So this experience that we have in other countries will enable us to serve as a guideline. How do we move forward with a consortium that was being put together? So it was more of us providing a framework to make it happen. It's not about choosing the consortium, because the consortium was a group of individual operators in Guyana coming together. So this was another part that I was not involved, but it's more of the gate where they did their own due diligence to see who are the people who are coming together. But for us in US Guyana, it was more of this transition between how do we work with GATE and enabled us to collaborate in this industry.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Bishop, your company, your JV, is targeting the security sector. I'd like to ask if you could share with the audience, how did you pick this sector? And then how did you pick your partner to go into the JV?
Testing, yes. So my background is in finance. People who know me know I love money, buy very cheap. So I wanted to tap into something that was different so that I could challenge myself as well. And when I conceptualized Aegis, I know that I didn't want to do it alone. So I wanted a partner that had experience in operational execution, not just planning, because anybody can write a plan, but it's about executing that plan. Somebody that shared my quality for the vision of the company as well. And as well as somebody who was trustworthy and accountable and was value-driven. And I had numerous persons that I spoke to, like my colleague at the end. You have to rely on your advisors. I had mentors, I had legal people, I had my team of accounting personnel, but more so my legal advisors. And it's like our due diligence process wasn't just financial or tactical, it was rational, where it is that we saw a company who was operating within the logistic industry and they were breaking barriers as a woman-led company. And when we approached them, it's like right away, they wanted to do this too as well. And it was an easy process from there on out, but then planning, the legalities of it, the registration, the setting up, the license, the permit, that is time consuming. The day has 24 hours, and I swear we were working 30 hours a day.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. And if I could ask Dominic and Chandradat, you've admitted that you're competitors, you spy on each other. How did you manage the negotiation process to bring yourselves together to form what is obviously a much needed conglomerate or joining of interests?
You see who is the senior partner. No, as I indicated earlier, as two competing businesses and two businesses that really want to see the transformation of the sector in Guyana, we had to come together. There was no way we could have individually invested in 2 mobile harbor cranes each at $10 million US dollars. So we had to find a common ground, and that common ground is to sit down together, understand the need for the market, understand the need for the transformation of the sector, and work together. It was not easy to begin with. We all have our differences, and the differences that we have, I would say, make us stronger as individual entities. But when it comes to work together in developing the quayside and investing in the 2 cranes, we see the common goal. It was, everybody has their different opinion on why we choose this brand over this brand, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end, after we looked at all the pros and cons, we went to various markets and see these cranes in operation, talk to the operators, talk to the maintenance person, then we establish which brand is adequate for and relevant for our market, given the conditions that we operate in. Obviously, these cranes had to be financed. Monishwar Limited took the initiative and engaged IDB in terms of the financing of these crane. When we recognized that our partner, John Finance, was a little back in terms of securing the financing, we took the initiative and create a bridge between IDB and John Finance, and hence we both have the assets financed by IDB in the acquisition. So to summarize it, it's hurdles initially to cross, but we have seen a common goal, and working together to bridge the gap was a collective effort, and it worked, as we see today.
Thank you.
I was going more with age before beauty versus seniority. So basically, after being in competition for how many years, the idea that was brought forward, as Mr. C had mentioned, wasn't brought forward last year or 2 years ago. It was brought forward more than like 8+ years ago. And it wasn't until about, 3-4 years ago that we finally wrapped our head around that the need in Guyana far outweighed our competitiveness. The need for vessels to be lighter when it lands in Guyana, given the draft in our port, we have a very shallow port, far outweighed us being competitors. So it reached to a point where the greater good was what we needed to consider. And it took many years, many meetings. I was not in most of them, Mr. C was. So it wasn't just, these two people decide to look over the fence and say, hey, let's do this together. There were lots of arguments, how it was going to be, who was going to do what, which way of management was better. All these things were considered, the legalities of it, how it was going to be run, who was going to put the personnel, if we were going to hire new people, take from the current companies. All these things needed to be considered, and it took a lot of time. Because even though we realized what the greater good was, it didn't mean that our competitiveness just went away. So that was a big part of it too.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Tukuran, if I can come back to you. You highlighted the very global presence of your group in 60-odd jurisdictions. I wanted to ask you, what is your perception of our local content landscape in terms of specifically the law, the Local Content Act, the regulations, and if you could share how that influenced your formulation of the company, including the consortia of 17.
I think the Local Content Act here, it's a reflection on where Guyana wants to be in terms of providing the competence in operating offshore, providing the capabilities for the companies to service the offshore sector. It's a law that I think it's what I've seen in other countries. It's not much different from what is being put forward here. Definitely in terms of ensuring that the manpower is mainly building the skills to meet the demand of this sector. The enterprises are gearing up to ensure that they can provide these services going forward. These are similar things that we have seen in different countries, but also a bit of vertical integration where you try to empower more people to build on what they are already doing in small scales to put it in a bigger scales, because as the needs and the market is growing, they need to be able to produce more, especially in catering in our business. We need to have more fruits and vegetables because it's need to be sent fresh on offshore every week. So if the local market is able to expand and provide these kinds of supplies, we are ready to take up. So in these kinds of operations that we are looking forward to, it's Similarly, in other jurisdictions, it's also a bit like, it doesn't stop at shareholders or suppliers, but also employees developing their skills. We have quite a lot of, as I said, we've been operating in this sector since 2019, from the first operation of the first vessel. We had quite some interesting cases where employees joined us and are now like the supervision status camp bosses. They are taking like a project manager role on the vessels. So these are capacity building that has been ongoing over the past years to ensure that, yes, we develop the people that are around us, because for us it's mainly a manpower and supplies that we are looking. We don't have major technical facilities that we need to provide, but it's mainly these two areas that we look forward.
Thank you. Dr. Surendra, if I could also make reference to the Act and ask you, how much influence did that have in your negotiation with your foreign partner in terms of the final formulation of the vehicle that you're using, the JV?
So the Act, as I've said before, it's not a given. It's a driving force for where you're going to be going. And the Act has some specific mathematical formulas that have to be satisfied. So as you start the conversation, you say, this is what the Act says. It says, this is the definition of a Guyanese company. This is what the management structure has to be like. This is what the employment structure. And so they have to understand they're willing to work with that or they're not. And that's the first hurdle. And so healthcare, which we're in, and is pretty unique. Right? I mean, you're putting people's lives at risk. And so when you are dealing with how safe is it that you are going to put a person on a plane, how good are you, you kind of have to have these data points. But the local content law, it provides a structure that then helps the accountants and the lawyers make sure that your joint venture is going to satisfy that aspect of it. So that's very important.
If I could jump across the panel back to Mr. Chintamani to ask the same question, because apart from Cranes Guyana, you've identified that the Monishwars Group has numerous other joint ventures with foreign entities.
Correct.
How has the Act played into your negotiations for those JVs?
Okay. So if I just mention on the Guyana shore-based side, of which Monishwar Limited owns 51%, not a joint venture, but GISB has been established before the incorporation of the local content regulations. But after the regulations came into being, we recognized some elements of non-compliance, and we have worked quickly to address those elements. So today, GISB is a fully compliant local content entity. In terms of the other JVs that we have established over the years, indeed, it plays a part. It allows us as a local company to be part of areas that we have virtually zero experience. So for example, in the tug and barge business we have established a couple of years ago, which was formed because there's a void in the market for quality barges, quality tugs, certified insured tug and barges. And we have partnered with a company out of Panama, and we have invested into, I think it's four tugs and 3 barges that are providing water transportation to meet the requirements of the oil and gas sector, as well as to the non-oil and gas sector. So it does have an impact in terms of allowing us to invest in areas of non-expertise that brings that experience and develop our local personnel and local skill set to function in that area. So when that tug and barge business started, we had most of the guys on board, the captain, the chief mate, the able-bodied seamen. They were all foreigners. But today we are proud to say that most of them on board are local persons who have been trained and developed by the overseas counterpart in terms of operating tug and barges in Guyana. Good. The most recent one that we have established, which is the tug business, providing harbor tug services for vessels coming in and leaving Guyana waters. Again, when we engage the regulatory bodies, there are many foreign companies that have been seeking to get into that sector. Hence, when we made a decision to invest in that sector, it met that requirement of local content in that sector.
Thank you very much. Dominic, if I could come over to you and ask a question in relation to the other JVs that you have, so with foreign partners. How was the group dealt with companies coming in from different jurisdictions where there may be different laws, they may come with different agreements drafted according to different regulations, and they'll expect that you will comply with those. How have you been able to manage that in your partnerships with foreign entities?
So John Finance has quite a few joint ventures. Most, if not all, were established prior to the local content. And if we have about 7 established joint ventures, we turned away 30. So at the time when oil and gas started in Guyana, people were coming in droves here, and they didn't know the Guyanese landscape, they didn't know anything like that, and they wanted someone to guide them. So I would say our experience has been a little bit more unique in terms of the people coming in from the different regions were looking for us for guidance because they didn't have the expertise to navigate our local laws, what was normal here, what to expect, and so on. So the experiences we've had, it's been more of we are leading this is how it should be because it's local, this is the Guyanese laws, this is how business works, this is the culture here, and we've had more of that experience. But like I said, we weeded a few out to get the good ones who are willing to listen and be more receptive to your guidance and whatnot.
Okay. And Dr. Bishop, would you share with us your navigation of the local laws in setting up your JV? I recognize that it's 2 local partners, but maybe if I could ask you to share what your experience was in navigating the local laws.
Okay, so for us, the local content legislation played a major role in us going forward with this partnership where it highlighted for us capacity building, empowerment, as well as opportunities for us to even exist within the oil and gas space, and doing this in a security environment which is highly dominated by the male counterparts. I see my colleague there from PGS, so it kind of streamlined what it is that we wanted to do as a company, and the local content, it set out for us the percentage in which we can operate as a local entity. And as a Guyanese own women-led security firm, providing services to the ONG industry, it gives us that framework so that we can exist and even collaborate with other local businesses like PGS if we want to collaborate in terms of combining our list of services. So it's just not opened only to Felicia and I or to Aegis and our shared group of companies, but for also the other security firms to come on board as well with us and partner.
Okay, thank you. So one final question before we open for questions from the audience. If you had to leave one bit of advice to our audience on one area or one red flag to look out for in negotiating and forming a JV, what would that be? And maybe if I could start at the far end and we can come down.
I don't want anybody in the audience to walk away with the feeling that this works all the time. It doesn't. And you need to have a clear-cut exit strategy. At the end of the day, this is a business, and you're entering into a relationship that in the ideal circumstances would work for the benefit of both persons, but it doesn't. So I have walked away from relationships that didn't work. For me, the key was in medicine to determine, is this something I'm going to need long term? Is this gap not going to be filled? Or is this a gap I expect will be filled? And so if you anticipate that this is a gap that will be filled, you need to have clearly put in an exit strategy. Okay, in 5 years, I will not need this. And you need to be upfront with your partner on that. So there is a clear-cut expectation. But key things, it's not always going to work, and have an exit strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tukaran?
I think it was important that we agree on a roadmap and ensure that we know in the long term where we want to go. So there was our goals are aligned. This was the first thing that we had to ensure that we are aligned, we are put in place. And at the same time, we ensure that I think communication is in place. We have good communication between the partners and the operators, the managers operating the company. And then two words, I think we need to have transparency and trust with everybody. I think these are things that need to be present for any group of people working together to ensure that we are aligned, we are meeting these goals.
Thank you very much. Transparency and trust.
Something you can consider as well, in addition to what my colleagues have said, is your business culture. How we do business in Guyana is very different how other people do business in different countries, especially as the further you get from the Caribbean. So ensure that when you're doing your negotiations and you're doing your due diligence, ensure that the persons you're aligning with have a culture that you can work with.
Thank you.
In addition to what everybody else says, get everything in writing from expectation to responsibility and exit, right? Build a brand, not a business. Talk about internal controls and cultures and everything else from your strategy. Most importantly, get it in writing.
Guyana is evolving in every sector, and you know, the President said that, and many of other speakers have said that. We don't have the local capacity to fulfill the requirements of all the sectors, and hence the need for us to partner both locally and overseas. You have to find the right partner. I'll give an example of one of the partnership that we have. There's a culture difference, there's a language difference, there's a dietary requirement difference, you can say. But at the end of the day, it's how we close those gaps through engagements and negotiation in the best interest of the partnership or the joint venture business. We must have common goals. We must have common elements that we want to focus on to ensure the success of all the joint ventures that we have. None of the joint ventures that Bhubaneswar is part of has an exit clause in them, because we are not thinking of a short-term joint venture arrangement. We're thinking of a long-term partnership for the investment and development of Guyana and the economy of Guyana. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think our panel deserves a round of applause. Thank you very much. I see the boss lady is back. So do we have time for questions?
Yes.
Or? Okay. So I will ask if there are any questions. If you would please put your hands up. Yes.
Thank you. I have two questions or two things. Culture is very important in a joint venture or in any business. And how do you operate with a board of directors? How do you take the decisions? In which moment do you take the decision to apply the exit clause?
So that decision comes when, at least for us, we haven't had to make it yet. We're in discussions in one of our JVs, but it comes to a point when you can see the relationship is no longer working, or the entity is no longer profitable, or you have a 5-year plan and you're no longer reaching your goals. These are things that could contribute to spring the board into having the discussion where, is this entity still viable? It's not an easy process. You might make the mistake of going beyond when you should have made the decision, as you don't want the relationship to not work, so you've invested all this time. But I can't tell you exactly when it would be, but there is a time where it would be very obvious where the relationship is no longer working and you need to have the difficult decision. that maybe this relationship needs to end for the better.
And if I may quickly comment, I mean, in our case, as I mentioned, there is no exit clause in the agreements that we have established. The composition of the board for the foreign entities, well, the foreign partners, and it complies with the local government legislation, which is 75% local. The management side of it complies also with the local content legislation. We have not crossed the bridge yet to know that any of joint venture is not functioning. They're all functioning, and I'm pretty sure as civil individuals, if we have recognized that any of the JVs is not profitable or not meeting expectations, they're going to be common engagement for that exit strategy.
Thank you. Any other questions for the panel? Sorry, I should have asked if any of the other panelists wanted to make a comment on this question. Not, you don't have to. It's fine.
I don't think it's something that we decide ourselves at this. It's something that is more between partners and discussion at higher level. And yes, there could be a situation that arises, but I think we are looking more in the long term for the moment. It's a newly growing, fairly new growing industry. So I don't think this question would arise now, but in a mature market where you have 25 years of development, then probably something like this might happen. But we don't foresee it in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Anita, one more question, or we're up for time?
So, somebody please ask a question. Guess what? I have good news. The snacks are here, and it's not snacks. I have a life lesson for you. I don't mean to cut into your panel. But you know how sometimes when you have something good and you think it's good, but when you wait, something better comes along? Well, something better is coming along. So for the ones who ate before, don't fear and go back and say, oh, I didn't think. But I am told that it is supposed to be outside. But can somebody please ask a question so I can be really sure, so I don't be embarrassed? You're certain you don't have no other questions? All right, I'll ask a question.
You're keen on the surprise you have outside.
I'm just waiting on my tea. Are we a go on the food? Oh, thank you, ma'am. I don't even care what you ask. You could ask them ASL. Just ask.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharada. I am a co-owner of a local laundromat. My laundromat's name is Luxury Laundromat. We're located at Grove on the East Bank. So my question for you is basically what are your tips that you would give for a young entrepreneur, a small business who's looking to make a joint venture with like an international laundromat in my case? That's my question. Thank you.
I have been handed a mic by the moderators, so I'm not sure how to answer this one because, I mean, I'm not young, I am not an entrepreneur, I am an employee, but I understand where you're coming from because it's about expanding a business and forming joint ventures or partners with not just necessarily overseas-based company, but also local company to expand your footprint. It's important to understand common goals, what you want to get out of it, whether you want growth, whether you want profits, etc. So you have to establish that. You have to establish the willingness of your other partner, the willingness of the partner that you want to engage with, and the willingness of yourself in terms of compromise. And if you're prepared to achieve that, or prepared to accommodate and to engage in that, I'm pretty sure you'll find that partner that can be successful like yourself.
So you have a local laundromat, so I'm assuming right now you're catering to people bringing in the laundry. Maybe they don't have washing machine, dryer at home. The first thing you'd need to do is find the sector that you want to serve, and it doesn't have to be oil and gas. I find that Guyanese nowadays feels like the only opportunities we have are in oil and gas. There are so many sectors that support oil and gas, agriculture, the hotels, all these people that come in and need somewhere to stay. Maybe you could try in partnership with hotels and help grow they need to wash sheets every day. You know, find a sector that your innovative idea can fill the need for, and then go from there. Who already exists in this sector, who would be willing to partner with you? We're limiting ourselves, because I find it all the time. You hear Guyanese people, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to study logistics because I want to work in oil and gas, but oil and gas is not the only opportunity. So don't limit your innovative ideas to just oil and gas. See which sectors you have that support your laundromat business, where you can get into, and then from there, look for partners, see who's willing to invest in what you do. You might find internationally there's this laundromat service that works. See how you can copy it here in Guyana and make it work for your local business.
Somebody else has a comment?
I think it's important to ask the question, why do you want to a partnership with? Is it for capacity? Is it for finance? Is it for development? Why do you need to have a partner? Then you can identify who is the right partner. Because if you don't know, just decide, well, I just need a partner, it's too vague.
Yeah, so to echo that, I mean, I generally ask people where you see yourself 5 years from today. Is it that you want to have 20 locations, 30 locations? So what is your trajectory? And that is going to drive the conversation. Is it finance you need? Is it somebody to help with the nuances of the business itself? And I think that drives your decision, where you see yourself 5 years from now, and then that's where the lawyers and the accountants come in to help guide us, because most of us are pretty good in our, whatever is our area of expertise. But when we're talking about growth, I mean, I can take out an appendix, but you ask me if I'm going to go from 1 clinic to 5 clinics, I have no clue how to do that from a finance standpoint. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Eugenie. Just wanted to ask you guys a question. If you're an entrepreneur and you wanted to start into the trucking business, and it's very hard to get into your sector and to understand how the logistics work, how do you, or what advice would you guys give into a company wanting to know more, or even to learn about the TMS systems as you spoke about? What way do you go, especially if you're from Guyana and you're like, you know what, I want to jump into this, but where do I go? What do I do? What would you advise?
I'm going to start by echoing the sentiment. Go to the local center for businesses, and they can help you there. But I'd like to ask, why trucking? As part of John Finance and Monash Shores, we find that the trucking industry is very saturated in Guyana. Everybody wants to buy a truck and do some work with it. So I can't speak for Monash Shores' experience, but we're constantly rejecting applications because we are so saturated with people that has a truck and wants to do trucking with you. So if you haven't started yet, maybe you could reconsider which industry has more of a need, because when you try to get into a saturated industry like trucking in Guyana, it's very difficult to get those contracts and those clients because there's so many people already doing it. And those people who've been doing it for years have trust with the suppliers, have trust, have a reputation, and you coming in as a newcomer, you'd have to come really good to be competitive.
That's a very interesting area that you have brought up. It's a saturated segment of the market. But that being said, if we look into the future, there are opportunities in the area. It's a segment that is what we call high volume, low margins. So don't expect to recover your investment in a very short time. The challenge we face in that sector is drivers. And you will have that issue going into that, unless you're prepared to bring in drivers from other countries, and which also add to your cost in accommodation and airfare, etc. So at this point, it's an area that is saturated. My advice is there are many other areas that requires investment. I just call one offhand, is warehousing, for example, or specialized warehousing are areas that one can consider. And that, again, you can form alliances with other partners in terms of establishing those facilities. That's an area of what I call, that's needed at the moment. As Munishwar Limited, I actually need about 10,000 square meters of warehousing space for one segment of our business. So it gives an idea of what is needed. That being said, when you look at the conversations that we had regarding northern Brazil cargo passing through Guyana for the rest of the world, transportation is required for that. If we look at the development of the deepwater port, as I made reference to earlier, there will be a lot of movement required for that. But, as I said, it's a low margin business, high volume, and prepared, if you want to get into it, prepare to have the weight to get your return on investment. But at the same time, look for alternatives in terms of covering your cost, your drivers, your porters, your maintenance, etc. The market here, demand for that is very high, and the workers, or the drivers, I should say, are demanding higher wages that makes your cost very uncompetitive. Right?
Maybe you can invest in training drivers instead of actual trucks.
Thank you. I think, Anita, are you ready?
So, I have good news. The food is upstairs. Now that's the time to lay it out. So, that's the reality. That's the reality. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you. But I want to jump in. I'm so grateful for you. Because you know something? This is the thing that you don't know. These are the things that you don't hear. Everybody say, oh my God, Guyana has so much opportunities. Yes, but it is a real challenge to the businessmen and women in this room who every day wake up, and sometimes the employees don't show up, and then the people don't pay, and you were waiting on this thing and it didn't come in, and you still, then the government says, oh, you gotta have quality, you gotta have capacity. I just want for you all to give yourselves a round of applause for sticking with it and making it through it. These people up here, I know they're experienced firms, but quite frankly, what worked 30 years ago isn't going to work today. It's just like your clothes. The clothes you wore as a baby, you can't wear today. Fashion changes, business changes, and everything is changing, and you have to change with it. So I personally, I'm appreciative of the frank, and I'm really like rambling here, just don't mind me. But it's just to say the value that was on this panel, because you rarely hear the reality of what it takes to start a business, to grow a business, to maintain a business, and then to speak about it 30 years after. We have a diverse panel. How many years, Dominic? 65 years for this. Munishwar's, Mr. Chentamani? 75 years. Dr. Prasad? 18. Alyssa is new. Jason is new. So what does that tell you? Whether you're at year 1 or year 76, challenges are always going to be there. So your best bet, as I was telling you about the football game, is you have to know what it requires of you to win and how you can get injured. And I think that we can agree that our panelists covered that today, right? Is there anything that you would have liked to know, but you didn't get to know?
Where's the deepwater port?
Who said that? All right. Khalil, anything else from your panel?
No. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That deepwater port information over a couple of years.
Like later at the cocktail, y'all could take my drink. I don't drink. So, is that okay? I want to express my gratitude to our panelists for honestly sticking with us, because guess what? Their panel was supposed to go on at 11:30 this morning, and they stayed here for you guys. When I spoke with them, they told me, oh, what time I need to come have meetings, this and that. I said, clear your day for me, please. But this is what happens, and I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights. Khalil, I know it's tax time. You're very busy, and I'm so grateful that you used your experience in navigating these complexities to bring out value added to the panel. So panelists, I want to thank you. And to the rest of you, thank you for your patience, but I believe that if you understand that they're laying out the food, you'll be happy. So I'm pleased to tell you, the chef has prepared some sort of stuffed ravioli and some fish. You know, it's like sometimes they'd fry fish or something, and then they call it some exotic name. So it's some sort of pasta and some sort of fish. But when you eat it, I want you to think to yourself that you're at a fine dining restaurant and you are savoring the most sumptuous piece of pasta and piece of fish you've ever had, and I promise you your stomach will agree with you. Ladies and gentlemen, in consideration for your patience, bearing up with a little hunger, we will break. And I thank my speakers that are coming after for understanding the situation. We all got to work together. We can't be working against each other. So we'll take a little break so that you can grab your much well-deserved lunch, and then we will come back for the remaining panels, which we will try to keep within time. Thank you very much. So I'll ramble for a bit so I don't look like a fool standing up here. Let me tell you what's coming next. Oh, Chris is here. Okay, how many people in the room are actively in business? Shh, we can't all talk at the same time. Raise your hands if you own a business. Okay, let me go again. Raise your hand, raise your hands up in the air. Raise your hands if you own a business. Okay. Raise your hands if you work in a business. Raise your hands if you own a business and you work in the business. Okay. Raise your hands if you are thinking of getting into your own business. Nobody, because you just see everybody say you got own the business. They sell you that dream, right? They sell you that dream of entrepreneurship and they say, oh my God, financial liberation. You can set your own hours. You can take vacation anytime you want. You're the boss. Yeah, let me tell you, no, it's a trap. You work 24/7. Your phone always has to be on. Even on vacation, you're accountable. And the buck stops with you. You know how when you're in an environment where you report to the boss, even if you screw up, like, no, I didn't cause the screw up, but I have to pacify the customer. You don't have that when you own your own business. So if you are thinking of getting into business, I would say broaden your shoulders and be prepared, because there will be strife, there will be challenges, there will be things that will make you want to pull your hair out most days. And you have one of two choices to make: sink or swim. Sink or swim. Fight or flight. And it's a hard decision to make because it's not as simple as it sounds. Anyway, still rambling, thinking of things to say, but I'll start. Now, I raised this question because how many of you are new to the business arena in Guyana? Like you're brand new, or you've just been in business operating within the last 3 years? Good. So therefore, you know that the ease of doing business in Guyana is sometimes not as easy, right? And that's simply because one part of the country is rapidly moving in a growth trajectory, and then another part of the country has to play catch up. So it is logical that you have these two forces, opposing forces, one pulling, the other one pulling, but in a different direction. There's bound to be some lag, some delay. I am so grateful that every time people attend conferences or summits or there are opportunities to speak, that they voice their concerns. That's why your voice matters. Because now our next speaker is going to focus on the outcome of some of the advocacy work that organizations who push very hard for change, and they think that they talk and talk and talk for years, but sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes you have to keep pushing until the narrative changes. So I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, the Honorable Sanjeev J. Dattadin. What's a J stand for? He's a member of parliament. I'm not reading his bio. I'm just rambling while the other people come in. He's a member of parliament, but he's also an attorney at law. He's been in the system for a really long time. He's not that old. He just joined really young. But he's very experienced. And today, he is going to talk to us about some upcoming legislative amendments that have one purpose in mind: to make Guyana more investor-friendly and to have a better narrative when it comes to the ease of doing business in Guyana and operating within the confines of regulations. So ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome Mr. Sanjeev Datidin. Sanjeev, I thought there'd be a podium, so.
Thanks.
You can sit. Sit.
Good afternoon. Hello. Oh. Oh, it's all right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'm relieved. I thought there'd be a podium, too. The intention is to give you as much information as I can, and then to take some questions from you in the event I might be able to be helpful. There are a few things that has happened in Guyana, and there are some substantial things that have happened. And of course, you've heard from His Excellency the President as to a lot of what is intended in the future and going to happen. You've heard from Minister Vikram Bharat, who's given you an idea of a lot more that is coming in the legislative scheme. You've heard from Mr. Monroe, and you've heard from Mr. Gosai. So I think they might have covered quite a bit of what might be coming, what are the likely, or what is the likely part, in many cases, of what happens. But if we could start, and I'd like to start with the simple things, the things that maybe not every business person is concerned about, but which is relevant. And the issue is an overall picture of the governance as it relates to the petroleum sector. Now, we've had a lot of legislation since 2020 about governance and what happens. There's, of course, the one that members of the public are more concerned about, which relates to the National Resource Fund. We've never had legislation like that before, and in simple terms, it's a place where the earnings in the petroleum sector are catered for. What happens with it, how is it applied, and how is it spent, which is always what you see on the front page of the newspapers. But the framework for the fund, the Natural Resources Fund Act, which came into being in 2021, is very simple. All revenues have to be paid into the consolidated fund that are received in the petroleum sector. Once in that fund, there is an agreed mechanism. When I say agreed, I mean stipulated by law mechanism as to how the expenditure takes place. So there is the first $500 million in any year, followed by a percentage of the next $500 million, and another percentage of the next 500, and so on. Those funds have to be firstly put into the consolidated fund. Then before it is spent, parliamentary approval is required for whatever programs it will be allocated to. One of the important things is What it could be spent on is restricted by the law, unless Parliament were to agree otherwise, but essentially it is to be spent on public infrastructure projects. Now, there is, and I should say there are different views, what and how the governance of the funds that are earned should take place. There are various models. This is our model. This is our version of what we are doing. And we think for a fairly small country with not as many institutions elsewhere, this is probably the best model for Guyana, meaning the monies are paid into the fund, the use of the fund is dictated by statute, the approval of the projects is parliamentary. That is pretty much the idea of what is to be achieved. Now, the other parts that we've had, we used to have the Petroleum Act. That is no longer with us. We now, since 2023, we have the Petroleum Activities Bill. Now, what that covers is essentially a lot that was covered in the Petroleum Act before, but with more safeguards that we thought were necessary. But what it does is this. If you're going to apply for an oil block, there is a procedure. If you're going to deal or partner or be a part of it, there is a procedure. What has to happen and what requirements have to be met are now underpinned to some extent, not entirely, by statute. What happens with a license when you get a license is also dealt with. What can the license do? The duration of the license, the extent of what is required. These are all things that are covered under the new act. So we've moved from legislation which was enacted previously, the Petroleum Act in 1996. We now have a new and fairly comprehensive, updated when compared worldwide, accepting principles that are more in keeping with the current thinking of how the sector should be at its genesis stage. This is the early stages of applying for a license, submitting an application for a block, what it is you can expect to get. There's the duration of it. Do you expect to get 5 years, 10 years? Do you have to provide work plans? What do you have to do with those work plans? So that is the next, if we say next level, or the upgrade to what we have, because there were a lot of things that were not catered to. In 1996, we hadn't really thought of oil and gas. It was certainly not on our horizon in real terms. So the legislation, though effective, was not what it should be if you want to develop the petroleum sector as Guyana currently does. The legislation is really a manifestation of what were recognized to be needs in the old act and even deficiencies to some extent. Now, additionally, we haven't done, for those of you who are interested in business, we haven't done very much to our company's legislation. And while there may be changes in the future, there will never, or there is very unlikely to be a sea change in our legislative policy or agenda that is, as it relates to that. The reason is simple. So many people have organized their affairs and their businesses in accordance with the current regime. Now, if you want to do business in Guyana, and there's a lot to be said for joint ventures, for collaborative efforts, you have to figure out a vehicle by which you're going to do this. Now, you can do it by a contract, a joint venture contract. You can do it by a simple agreement where you are separate but together. Or you can do it in the form of a company and the shareholding as allotted by that company. Now, bear in mind that legislation that we have presently to deal with partnerships is fairly dated. Bear in mind that the legislation that even as exists elsewhere as it relates to partnerships do not necessarily lend themselves very well to more than two. When partnerships get in multiples greater than two, it gets complicated. Because the whole relationship, you got to think about it this way, that the whole relationship gets somewhat confusing because partner A is doing X, partner B is doing Y, and partner C is doing Z. What do they owe each other in relation to what they do A? Is it only to the partnership, to themselves, any obligations, or further? Those contracts and those would get complicated. But this is not to say, please don't take it to mean that you can't do a partnership with 15 persons or 20 persons, as long as the common objective is established. But for you to do it with greater than two, it becomes cumbersome, it could become very costly and time-consuming. Now, the other vehicle that you could use, and the preferred one, is a company and every person has shares, which means it's equal across the board, it's clear and demarcated what it is, and is in fact the one that is recommended. The other reason is, under the Companies Act, there is an established regime of how things happen and what should happen. There are built-in protections, such as the requirement of annual returns, such as you having to declare related party transactions. And if you don't, then there are consequences. Now, these are the things that most persons entering into a partnership want to have addressed. So by putting it in legislation, which it is in Guyana in our Companies Act, it means that so much of it is already done. So in terms of costs to set up, costs to get going, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can simply use the rules that exist, the procedures that exist, even the documentation that exists, and follow that through. So if you were to do it all from scratch, and I know I see some of the persons in the room who've done it all from in terms of a contract, and they can tell you that it's a very involved process, it's a very lengthy process, and it can be a very costly process because you could negotiate all the way to the brink of acceptance and then might have to start over again because something else has come up. Now, for large businesses, it's just as bad as it is for small businesses who are engaged in that. But for small businesses, the time and the cost may be debilitating. They might be in a position where they can't continue to engage in that way. So one of the considerations that there always is to go with a system under the Companies Act that is more along the tried and trusted. One of the other things that has happened since 2024 is we have a new Arbitration Act in Guyana. Now, arbitration is simply a different system of dispute resolution. Essentially what it is, and it's commonly referred to as a one and done. So you have a dispute, there's a regime whereby you can select and choose your arbitrator, select and choose the system of arbitration you want and the law to be applied to your dispute. You go to a single arbitrator, and that decision is final and binding, save some very egregious errors such as bias or fraud, those issues, and then you can set aside. But if you agree to go to the dispute, then the dispute settlement process, it favors you going to the High Court, then going to the full court of the High Court on appeal, then going to the Court of Appeal, following that, and then going to the Caribbean Court of Justice. It saves the fourth tier of courts. Now, it is a truism that Guyana's court system does not react or move as quickly as most litigants would like. It's even more, I don't want to say slower, I don't want to say less effective, but for commercial disputes, which could be particularly complicated, it would be unsuitable because of the sheer litany of what needs to be considered by the court. Now, arbitration and the Arbitration Act was passed with specifically that in mind. The Act allows that you can use Guyana essentially as a hub. So what would happen? There are several arbitration tribunals around the world. Most of them are, they wouldn't say that they are specialized, but they are more or less specialized. FIDIC contracts, which are in the construction sector, they're tribunals that are more familiar with that. The Chamber of Maritime Arbitration in Paris, they do mainly maritime law. They're the International Commercial, which also do mainly commercial disputes. So you can choose a regime of laws that you would like. Now, under our law and under that bill, you can make that agreement, because arbitration must be by an agreement. You can make that agreement at the time you enter into the partnership or the joint venture, or you could do it after a dispute arises. It is, of course, well advised that you should do it before, because if you try to do it after, it is not unlikely that one party may not be as motivated to resolve because they may see it to their advantage. In that case, the court systems are available for you to deal with. Now, in terms of matters to deal with the Local Content Act, I think most of you who are here are involved in businesses in the petroleum sector, and all of you have had to be dealing with the Local Content Act, the certification, what you need to know. Now, the Local Content Act has to be viewed for what it really is, and it must not be looked upon for what it is not. Now, simply, the revenue held by any country over its natural resources can be obtained by two ways: payment of agreed fees and royalties to the government, and recovery to the local population. Now, there is, I don't want to get into too much of the PSA that is much talked about and its strengths or weaknesses, but what is recovered by the PSA with, for example, Exxon and the government of Guyana is recovered by the government of Guyana for the government of Guyana to utilize, any government to utilize in funding the country. But the Local Content Act is really for local businesses to benefit. That is still a recovery. That is still a recovery on the production that is going on. Now, we all know the issues that relate to whether or not they are genuine partnerships and whether or not they are not genuine partnerships. I would always encourage, do not enter into transactions that require your signature that are not true. There's simple reason, and I think it's sensible advice. It's a criminal offense. So you may not want to do that. If you're a daredevil and you think, well, you're smarter than everyone else and you can get away with it, then go for it. Maybe you get away with it, maybe you don't. But the principle of the legislation, it says 51% majority Guyanese national owned. It's not very popular with persons who are not Guyanese nationals, but immensely popular to the local business sector, because they now have an opportunity to be competitive. But again, on an overall basis, more resources remain in the country. That's the thinking. Now, we all know that the Local Content Act is going to be improved upon. You've heard from other speakers of pathways that it may go. But you could rest assured, vested rights and interests are not where changes will happen. Changes will happen in areas that improve the existing framework and make it and take it further. So, for example, if there are 40 sectors, key service areas now, those areas may increase. If there is a 5% requirement, it might go up to a higher percentage. Now, I'm sure that a lot of the information that you would have had in the past, this morning, would have told you just how much is involved. 1,100 companies in Guyana operate with local content licenses. 6,500 people are employed by those companies with local content license. The value, if we take it by revenue, has been growing year on year and exceeds 525 million United States dollars. But if we take a look at what's coming has to be and will be along the lines of how do we make it better. So, how do we take the efficiencies of the Local Content Act that exist in the petroleum sector and put it into other sectors? Now, we all heard earlier, for example, that trucking in Guyana is oversubscribed. But trucks are not only required in the petroleum sector. They're required in agriculture. They're required in getting goods and material into the interior locations, whether it's for mining, whether it's for tourism or education. Now, a requirement that the companies and the sectors that are involved have to provide a percentage of their revenue must be earned from other sectors drives that efficiency that has already been built up in the petroleum sector. So it works simply this way. Let us say, for example, agriculture. Trucks are needed to transport produce, rice, paddy, whatever, to the mills. Now, those trucks, there are not many available because everybody is waiting or listed or connected to the petroleum sector. And they're waiting for services or they're waiting to do work in that sector. Now, if you took that same industry and you said, what we need is trucks in agriculture, and you require trucking companies to provide that 10% of their revenue, for say, must be earned from the agricultural sector, then those companies are going to be obliged to take that same efficiency, the same service that is being provided, and provide it to rice farmers or millers. The result, or the aim, is that it would mean not only the availability of resources for other sectors, but the competitive nature by which it must be done would require that those sectors get cost advantages as well. Now, there is much to be said, and time wouldn't permit me to go down all the avenues of exactly what that would be. But the principle has to be understood. If we are to take our efficiencies that have developed in a very competitive petroleum sector and apply it to the other sectors in Guyana, then we stand to have not only the availability of services, but the availability of competitive services at better rates. So when we're saying, where is the Local Content Act going? Yes, we're going to do the usual. We're going to do all of the things that relate to is going to increase in the number of sectors. But as you might have observed this morning, one of the issues that relates to the current regime is when a local content certificate is granted, then there is a renewal 1 year later. At that time of 1 year later, there should have been financial records prepared that would divide and provide for the division of profits in accordance with the agreed measures that the parties would have agreed and in accordance with law. Now, if you want to find compliance, then you need to have access to those documents to demonstrate compliance. Now, the Local Content Secretariat is at present able to ask for that because the legislation is pretty much that whatever is requested. But if it is refused, statutory agencies are best protected if there is clear legislation and regulation in that effect. Now, you heard from the minister this morning that the Local Content Act and its regulations are going to be updated. I'm sure you heard the same from Mr. Monroe. You would have heard the same from Mr. Gosai. But this is the direction to which it will go. Better scrutiny of existing rules to ensure compliance. Better management of information to ensure that that which is not does not occur. Now, part of this is a very, should I say, I don't want to say unpleasant, but part of it is about ensuring compliance. And we have to understand as a culture that regulatory compliance becomes a necessity for any sector, anywhere, if there's going to be compliance with legislation where persons require a license or a permission or a certificate to act. The granting of the license, the certificate, or whatever it is, must be clear to all that apply and even all that hold it, so that they will understand what their obligations are. In the absence of that, it becomes arbitrary. And if it's arbitrary, then persons like me, when we are lawyers, we'd have a field day. Arbitrary is our friend. But if we're talking of management, of a process that must go forward, that can't be the way that it goes. Before I close, I just wanted to, for completeness, raise with you the Environmental Protection Act. The regulations and the act itself is very relevant to the petroleum sector. There is, as you well know, a number of cases engaged in the courts, but one has reached the apex court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, that has gone through all of these issues that relate to EIAs, environmental impact assessments. about bonds, about insurance. And I just want to raise with you two things without going in depth into the legislation. Our act is very comprehensive. It was ahead of its time. And we have to understand what it provides for in critical ways. So our act specifies in it certain legal concepts and principles that in the 1990s, early 2000s were considered cutting edge and are now the standard. So for example, we have a requirement of polluter pays. Now, you would have heard that oil spill legislation is coming and will be soon enacted. There are some drafts, and it is comprehensive and very advanced compared to whatever is around and meets those obligations that are currently being spoken about around the world. So there will be specific legislation in that regard. But under the our Environmental Act, polluter pays is a principle under the Act, which is very, very simple. Whoever causes the pollution pays for the cleanup. Very simple. Precautionary principle also exists under the legislation. So when we talk about insurance bonds, and we know that it's been topical and it's been considered by the courts about unlimited guarantees and matters to that effect, they become otious, not required and senseless to pursue, where the legislation of the country provides for polluter pays. Because although what you're chasing is a guarantee, you have a statutory guarantee available to you about how mishaps are going to be dealt with. Hopefully, I've done my best to give you an overview, and if there are a few questions, I'd be happy to help if I can. We hearing you.
Of a nominee director, nominee shareholder, you know, other jurisdictions for structural purposes like Cyprus and some other Channel Islands. By law, the institution of a nominee shareholder, nominee director exists with certain protections for the nominee. Second question, as you might or might not know, a lot of legal firms are offering the services of the nominee shareholder for local content purposes. Is this a situation where the market is moving ahead of the legislation will catch up, or what's your opinion on that?
Well, the simple answer about nominee directors and nominee shareholders, our legislation doesn't provide for it. The jurisdictions which you mentioned are typically offshore jurisdictions. The reason why nominee directors and nominee shareholders are very common in the offshore sector and the offshore companies and businesses is because they're not usually there. The true ones are not there, and they need a proxy to turn up to sign documents probably once a year or every time that there is an investigation, to attend wherever, including with banks, with regulatory agencies. And if they don't have the authority of a shareholder, in some cases, or a director, they're not able to do so.
You know, Cyprus is probably a EU member from my memory, so offshore is not necessarily.
Oh, Cyprus has a booming offshore sector. But the nominee concept, so our legislation is very clear about it, which is why you have to declare beneficial owners, beneficial, and those certifications that have to be done. Our model is very akin to before our Companies Act was the English Companies Act, which, like most of our laws, because we were a colony, we've inherited from England. But in 1996, we took a big departure as it relates to Companies Act. We're more along the lines of a hybrid, but more heavily influenced by the Canadian model. So the Canadian model is a much simpler piece of legislation where it comes to documentations and where it comes to positions of director, shareholder, and office holders. Those things are very set out. The wide breadth that is provided under, for example, the English legislation don't exist. It's obviously, at the time it came about in 1996, at the time it came about in Guyana, it was suitable because, and it still is, because it does not require as much records and it does not require as much intervention from lawyers, meaning persons in the company can essentially fulfill the task quite effectively.
Hello. Sorry, yeah, just a quick one. The Local Content Act resides primarily in the Natural Resources Ministry. Do you see, and the Secretariat as well, do you see that, do you think its remit can be widened to include, for example, other sectors like mining, which is not too dissimilar from oil and gas?
Well, the gentleman who spoke first this morning would have been the best man to ask because he's the person driving the bus about where it goes. But to answer your question simply, notwithstanding its current location, the movement into other sectors so that services are provided, so that the efficiencies can go in that direction is a thought process that is moving along. That will be an issue of policy and where it goes, but it is expected that in the next iteration of the Local Content Act, that will be addressed to some extent. Thank you very much.
My favorite word that I took away from that was notwithstanding. That is true lawyer jargon, notwithstanding. All right. Well, the room still has lots of people. That means you're getting quality information, right? No? Okay. I think so. I think so. I think that this is information that is not always readily available and certainly not in one place where you have an opportunity to, if you're not sure, ask a question. Our next panel, which I'm going to condense very quickly because I am the moderator, I consider this group of people the most important when it comes to keeping our eyes focused on continuous improvement. And these are the business service organizations. A lot of you in the room are probably members of them, or if you have tried to get into country, you probably have been a part of trade missions, delegations, and you would have interacted with the business service organizations. I'm going to ask our panelists to join me on stage. We have an executive member of the Private Sector Commission, no stranger to the business scene. He's a former president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, a very successful and experienced businessman, Dr. Clinton Erling. We have the president of the Women's Chamber of Commerce, Miss Josephine Tapp. we have the Vice Chair of the Women in Energy, Miss Felicia Duke. And because they will raise issues that require responses, Mr. Michael Monroe of the Local Content Secretariat. Would you rather me sit there with you or stand here?
Stand there, but we can do an open forum and then
All right, let me tell you how this is going to run. The makeup of it says successes, challenges, and advocacy. I'm going to challenge these speakers, since you know this like the back of your hand, because you are waiting for this day. Everybody, you have 2 minutes to tell us the biggest success in the last year, because we don't need to go back to the last 3 years. In the last year, in each of your organizations, what is the biggest success that you have experienced as a result of continuous improvements in the local content legislation?
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So, in terms of the biggest successes, I would say this has been more as a result of the culture that the local content legislation has developed in the oil and gas industry, where we had one of our members, that's Matt Powell, Marine Institute. She has been working very closely with the oil and gas industry over the past 2 years. And over the past year, she's actually continued to work with them to be able to support the development of local content in terms of the seafarers and marine personnel required for the operations, and has actually had the first female graduate of the seafarers program, the cadet program. And that was made possible by working alongside a lot of the oil and gas companies, including Noble and similar organizations. And I think without us having this legislation, but also the local content, the oil and gas companies, understanding the importance of local content and developing it, this would not have been possible. So I would say that's been within the past year. Of course, a longer time period, we have a lot of members who have developed partnerships, but I was given a specific time period, so.
Well, I see the Madam Chair. She's looking at her watch very carefully. The biggest success, in 10 seconds or less, the biggest success for us at the Private Sector Commission as a member, if you're asking me about members, I would say is the consortium that is developing the oil, which is the Exxon, Hess, and CNOOC. Without that consortium and first the discovery and the development, none of this, we wouldn't be having any of this conversation. In fact, you look at the economic growth in the country, it comes from, everything springs from that consortium and what they're doing. But on a more broader level, the Private Sector Commission, and maybe all the organizations up here, each and every one of us were instrumental in formulating the Local Content Acts. In 2021, and even prior to that, we held discussions, numerous discussions with all the stakeholders within the private sector. We came up, or we played an integral role with the government in formulating the contents of that act. And just last year, or the past two years in general, we've held a series of discussions with both government and our membership in terms of talking about upgrading and updating that act. This culminated, we had a big, large focal group session right here in this room sometime the end of last year. The Private Sector Commission came up with a comprehensive document with recommendations. I'll probably elaborate on that some more, but I'll just pass. But that act, which we submitted to the government of Guyana, and not the act, the input that we received, will go towards the upgrading of that act. And it's critical because this act now, we've had a sufficient time to examine what has worked, what is not working, and what we need to upgrade. You heard from some of the speakers this morning from the government side. I can elaborate a little bit from what came out of the sessions that we held with the private sector.
Hello, everyone.
So basically, from the women in energy standpoint for us, one of the greatest successes for us that we've noticed this year based on the local content legislation. So we've started the framework for a consortium for our female business-owned members within our organization, primarily looking at areas like procurement, logistics, consultancy, HSE, and other technical services. I think one of the things that's for female business owners, and this is from my own personal experience, with the Local Content Secretariat, basically mapping out key specific areas that, as you know, we may call them the low-hanging fruits, but they're not. So it opens or it creates an opportunity for women-owned businesses to be able to bid for projects and to be able to play a vital role within the sector. So I think that was a great success for us as an organization.
Thank you. It's not time for you yet. Great. So that's the good things. Wonderful. Frame for me the top 2 challenges that in the past year have sort of festered, because I would imagine the challenges is what drives the advocacy points. So it means that these started off as little nudgings, you were a little concerned, maybe 2 members had it, and then you moved on and you move on. So they've been festering. These are challenges. And I know that there are challenges in 3 dimensions. You can have challenges with the legislation itself, complying. You have challenges with the industry. And then you have challenges with the Secretariat. Because I would imagine at no point in time, nowhere in this world, everything works properly. So I want you to frame for me the top 2 challenges that have been festering within your organizations, because that will now lead us to the advocacy points.
If I may start, as a female business owner leader. So one of the things that we've noticed, and it is a major, major challenge, is access to finance. You know, many times at every event you air it and people may be like, what do you mean access to finance? Whenever you're able or you've won a project within the oil and gas space, especially from the prime contractors, you require resources, not just capacity resources, meaning the manpower or the skill set or the ability, but you need financial resources to be able to pull off those projects. And what we've noticed for women-owned businesses, that's a challenge. Sometimes persons would think the best way is to partner with an international company or so forth, but that's not always the best way. And so that is one. Compliance regulations, meeting requirements. I think it was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers, the high demand when it comes to insurance. And sometimes, you know, companies may not have the resources to pay millions of dollars for insurance. So what we've been looking at as an organization is basically how can we help female business owner leaders to navigate those rough waters. Because if you don't have finance, you can't compete within the space, and that's just the truth.
So yes, before you pause, maybe I should add a little bit of a backup, because the mere fact that these organizations exist and they are called business support organizations is to do just that, support your businesses. So I like the fact that you have alluded to the challenges, but also what you're doing to resolve the issue. Because I am pretty sure that the bankers and the finance providers in the room or even out of the room will say, the money is there. It's there for the taking. You just have to make yourself ready. And I endorse that. The money is there. So I suppose the best thing you can do is to prepare your members to ensure that they can access what is already there to be accessed. And you mentioned compliance and regulations. Again, it's there. So I like that you alluded to the fact that you are empowering your members to do that. So I'll ask Clinton in that same vein to, yes, festering challenges and what you as an organization, without going back to the already mentioned recommendations, but I mean at an operational level within the chamber.
Well, the Private Sector Commission, but I like to talk about financing, and this ties right back into one of the biggest challenges that everybody in this room who've received the contract have complained about, and it has to do with the invoicing. The contractors, they will pay the invoices. Some of them run up to 6 months. Some people, we've had examples of folks telling us even a year. That puts a strain on cash flows for companies operating in this space. Some companies have tried to work out with their relationships with the banks that they have to have different mechanisms in which they can access cash flows to make up for that gap that is occurring. One of the recommendations that actually came out from the consultations and that the Private Sector Commission made to address that particular issue is the establishment of some sort of a local content, either a development bank or a financing facility established by government or has government-backed guarantees, so that persons can either, when those shortfalls occur and you're waiting longer to get your funds from from the contractor, that makes up for that. We're also, one of the second issues that we're hearing, and one of the main complaints that is coming in, there's also, in some instances, an insurance or a bond requirement at the RFI stage or the RFP stage before the contract is even issued. So that put a strain also on capital. Here you have to bid, and sometimes you're bidding against international suppliers who have deep pockets, and they can afford this. They can afford a longer cash flow delay or deferral than some of the smaller companies operating here. So that is a second one. But there's some other issues that we keep hearing coming out from it. The other one has to deal with GRA really quickly, VAT, and the application of VAT. There's lots of exemptions that go to international companies that are not afforded to our local companies, unfair on every level. And that is something that has to be addressed from a legislative level, which meaning the government will have to address that and make it a priority. And lastly, I'll just throw in another one just for extras. We've heard several complaints, and even when I was in this room and we had the big focus group forum, about folks saying, hey, even renewing the local content certificate is an issue. There is no set, straight, predictable guideline. In fact, some say, hey, mine renewing a day. Somebody says it's a month. Somebody say a year. So we have the Local Content Secretariat also has some work to do in that regard to ensure that it's an even, predictable playing field once I know what the requirements are to renew my certificate. I can give you a few more, but I'll pass the mic.
No. Before we forget, Michael them is fighting words. What say you?
I think the concern is legitimate. Since I've been here this morning, persons came up to me raising different issues, and I think one of the things that I discerned is that, as I think Clinton mentioned, there are different, it appears that different persons have different experiences relative to the timeline in terms of the application for the certificate and the renewal of the certificate. And I think in that regard, there is a legitimate concern where we need to find a way to streamline the application process to ensure that, I think once the minister said, once all your ducks are in a row, it can be made easier. I think the minister alluded to a 3 weeks time frame, and I think that would be the mandate within which we would operate going forward. It's not my place to say whether it would be 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, but we got the general mandate this morning. I think also the local content app that we recently launched, currently it provides information on procurement opportunities or whatnot. I think there must be consideration of how we could leverage technology to create efficiencies in all these areas. For example, the application process as well as the renewal process. So let's say you, within the tip of your fingers, if perhaps you could use the app to scan and upload your documents, that goes directly to the Secretariat. A queue is created. So for example, if you apply today, another person applies tomorrow, the technology already places you in a queue, and that way the Secretariat can have a structured way in how they look at these applications. And I think those are ways or tools that we can use to make the process more predictable, more clearer, and it would, I think, obviate some of the concerns that persons have in terms of the timeline, because again, you don't want to, or we don't want to fester the belief that maybe some persons are being treated differently than others when the legislation is created for everyone. So we want to ensure that it's clear, it's predictable, and there is a reasonable time frame in which you can expect some positive response or some response. It might not even be positive. It might be, okay, we're having concerns in this area or this not. So persons feel that they're being responded to, and I think that is what we will continue to work on. And I think forums like these allows us to understand these issues. But again, we got the mandate this morning that at least we're working within a three weeks time frame to ensure that we leverage our in-house competencies to work towards that. But more broadly, I'm just throwing this out there that perhaps we could use the app and use technology to see how we could create better efficiencies in treating with the application process and the renewal process, so persons won't be frustrated in how this is dealt with.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, for the people who are waiting, I don't believe they really care how it's done. I think they care that it is done. So I think the challenge to throw out is whatever works, whatever gets us to the result, is probably what they're looking for. But I 100% agree with you. The app has been created for that purpose. And as long as you can have your ducks in a row in the Secretariat that the process supports the technology, I believe that come next year, when I ask you to speak of a success, you'll tell me, we took the feedback, we put it into practice, and it worked. So I look forward to hearing that. Josephine?
All right, so I'll quickly echo some of the issues brought by my colleagues. Of course, access to finance. The Local Content Secretariat persons have indicated issues in the timeline it takes being inconsistent. And I just want to quickly pitch there that I think we do have, with the single window system, what seems to be a robust framework for accountability being added to approval processes. So whether that's something that can potentially be adopted to the Local Content Secretariat is something I was always curious about. But apart from that, I do want to point out, and I think that's why we have so many people in the room, that the hunger for information has outweighed our hunger in our bellies, because we're all hungry, but we're still here this afternoon. And I think that as much as we have organizations, the center, of course, is a great wealth of information, and Local Content Secretariat, you can go in for information if necessary. I think beyond that, women especially, we're relatively new to the business arena, relatively new to the oil and gas arena. Information is difficult for us to come by. So I think what's necessary is information being intentionally disseminated through the population, as well as potentially some level of development of a supplier development platform that goes beyond just the provision of information, but also how can I identify gaps? How can I be able to build my business to be able to access the opportunities? I know that the business help desk is something that the PST is looking at, but something that's maybe oil and gas specific. You know, the requirements of the oil and gas industry are not exactly the same as banks, which is what the PSC help desk is looking at. So that's where I think information is needed, as well as information to be able to inform our advocacy efforts. Because yes, I can say that to me it seems as though women, as much as we're registered with the Local Content Secretariat, we may not have the same level of access to opportunities, but why not? So information is so important in being able to even frame advocacy efforts, and I would like to see information being more easily accessible by members of the general population.
Okay, and the final question to the panel before I throw it out is, given what you've discussed, if each of you, if tomorrow, the people who could make these changes said, I'll give you one change, it has to be the most critical change. You see, you don't need to change everything. Pareto theory. You only need to do the most important thing that will get you to your outcome. And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so if you need to go beyond one, that's fine. But the single most important thing, that if it were to change tomorrow, it would change the trajectory of the outcomes for your members, for general business, as a whole? What's that one critical thing? Felicia?
Thank you. For us at the Women in Energy, I would say that one critical thing would be creating systems or basically policies that makes access to finance easier for women-owned businesses. Why am I saying that? I know for a fact that we have the capacity to do the other things that will be needed by women-owned businesses, like upskilling and mentorship and training. Because one of the things I love about our organization is our directors, these are, or most of them, well, we just have one student director, but the other directors are business owners. So we can be able to guide the women within our organization to navigate the other challenges, compliance. We've been through that. We've been structuring our businesses, getting our business up to maximum compliance, working with local content on all that. So we can walk them through those steps or those stages of their business. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when they start winning these contracts, they will need to have finance. And so if there are mechanisms in place that could complement, you know, all of these upskilling and all the training and the mentorship and all of that, then it will help them to be more competitive within the space.
If you manage to get past the financing, well, I would say if you get past the financing, I think besides, and overall, I'll say we need to have the Act upgraded and amended to include all the provision. This conversation will take more than a panel for me to expand on it, so I won't go there. But there's lots of good recommendations, and if you can get a copy or maybe share a copy with all the members present at the forum of the proposals pushed by the Private Sector Commission, that would be the one fundamental change. In fact, in there, we also looked at, there's those 40 areas where we provide or supply services to the sector. We're asking for them to change the percentages on those 40. We're also asking to add an additional 27 new service areas that weren't considered in the original schedule we call Schedule A. But I think overall, though, the most critical one for me would be an even, equitable application of services coming from both the contractors, the government in the form of the regulators, the GRAs, etc., being afforded to the locals, the same sort of concessions and exemptions that are afforded the large international, either it's an international supplier who wins a contract, or the contractor who gets all the exemptions, those things, and even when we go to renew, from the smallest business in Guyana, those companies should also have an equal opportunity to participate in the sector and have those same exemptions granted to them that are granted to the international companies.
So I would echo Clinton on the proposals which were put forward by the PSC. It's a strong document. It's very well thought out. I know that they also reached out to many of the BSOs in terms of us being able to contribute to that document. But I think beyond that, I'm really a believer in the supplier development, the expanding of that, especially with the center having to restructure at this stage. How do small and micro businesses, the center is looking at sustainability, which of course may come with a price tag. So how do small and micro businesses, how do the single woman or man who runs his own company, her own company, who may not have the assets to be able to purchase or sign up for a program, how do we ensure that they still have access to information? How do we ensure that they still have access to accelerator programs? So I think knowing what's coming, being prepared for that, legislatively or policy-wise within the government of Guyana.
Okay, thank you. I know that, speaking to your point, that the Women's Chamber does a lot to prepare new female entrepreneurs in the space. I know there's also from Exxon. Actually, I was waiting until the industry perspective, but I must shut it out. Today, everybody says, oh, there's so many women in the room. I want to single out ExxonMobil, Guyana, for sponsoring 75 women to attend this conference here today. I'd just like to applaud them. And these, we're going to call them students because even though they may be good at their craft, these are women who have gone through their incubator program, their entrepreneurship programs, and a lot of it has to do with the Women's Chamber. But I just want to say one thing to all of you. The day that you plant the seed is not the day that you will eat the fruit. You have to nurture it. Whatever you do today, whatever you say today here, it has to go through a process, and we must appreciate that. Because just because we say something needs to be changed, and it might be, I'll tell you how difficult it must be. Michael comes in, he has a requirement. Let's say Sanjeev is the regulator. Say, okay, we'll give you what you want. Felicia comes in, she has another ask. So I say, okay, we'll give you what you want. And then Clinton comes, no, I need these 3 things. Oh, we give you what you want. And it's like the ice cream truck. I want a strawberry, I want a peach, I want a vanilla, I want a plum. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, that's just not how macro policy is intended to work. There are lots of considerations because there's so many other people who will be impacted by it. But I would say what you've succeeded in doing is planting the seed. You have to water it. So if you keep focused on that, the day that you plant the seed is not the day that you will eat the fruit, but you continue to nurture it, continue to water it, refine it, work. One day, all of us in this room and people who will come after us will eat the fruit. That's the best thing I can say. Don't get frustrated. In the process, guess what? The hardest part is the middle. That's the part where most people give up. When you get the rejection from the bank. When you've been through the training, but you've taken all the knowledge and then somebody didn't pay, you're $10 million in debt, you've mortgaged your house and you're on the verge of losing it. What do you do then? But that's the reality of life. It's in the middle that most people want to give up. But stay the course because the end will be worth it. So, Michael, now that you've heard everything that they have to say, is there anything that you can say from the Secretariat standpoint, being the people that are tasked with the local content legislation working? Is there one thing that you can commit to improving for the business service organization, business support organizations that will make their minds feel at ease? One thing.
Anita, you've placed me between a rock and a hard place. I think now I won't differ. I think based on the advice that we got from the minister this morning in terms of the timeline for the processing of applications and the renewal of applications, I think that's a commitment that's safe for me to be married to at this point in time, so as to ensure that the Secretariat is more responsive. We want to ensure that persons don't feel frustrated, so we'll endeavor to streamline the process to ensure that applications are dealt with in a more timely way. So within that 3 weeks, I don't know if perhaps you would expect a decision, but you would expect a response from the Secretariat that would guide you. For example, if you need to submit more information, let's say if all your ducks are in a row, well, more than naturally, you can expect a positive response. So in terms of commitment, the 3 weeks timeline, as guided by the Honorable Minister.
We'll take it. We'll take it. In a year, we can know. We will know. But thank you for considering that. Now, I want to open the floor for brief questions. I'll take 3 questions if you have any. Anybody? That means you were clear, the concerns were addressed, you echo the sentiments, you want the same thing? Well, that's wonderful. Yes.
suppliers' payments?
It's not that there's clear rules, it's the way it's invoiced. It takes a long time for the payments to be made from the contractors or subcontractors.
Sorry, another question. So when you invoice your client, it is not clear how many days in how many days they have to pay?
No, it's not clear. And that's one of the reasons why we've been advocating if that could be fixed to 30 days, maximum. So some contractors, they also maybe wait until the entire job is completed, and even when that is completed, the payment takes a while to come. And in some cases, we've heard 6 months. Some folks in here might tell you they get paid even within a few days. So yes, to answer your question directly, it's not clear because there's no statutory requirement for that to happen.
Another question. If you, for example, you clarify all the rules in the contract in terms that what are the items that generate an invoice, for example, I'm going to sell you a UPS solution, for example. And one of the, say, when I ask to the factory for the equipment, you have to pay me the 10%. Then when I install the equipment, then you have to pay 20%. When the equipment starts, then another percent. And at the end, when you have the engine perfect, then you pay the rest. Isn't that possible to declare at the beginning in the contract?
It's listed in the contract. Those terms are listed. But again, look, for instance, I have a company. I've never had problems with payment, but my example I don't want to use as the norm. But there's companies, or there are companies when they complete, maybe you might get the incremental if there's a 10% down payment and then a 20% later on, those might be made, and then the final payment is maybe 50%. That 50% final payment might take a while to come to you. And that is where one of the seminal complaints came from.
Yes, that is a very big problem because the cash is the queen or the king.
Yes, and that's why a lot of companies have had to rely on their banks to get those working capital increases or even access working capital, period, for smaller companies. It's very difficult.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make one point before we go.
Sure, go ahead, go ahead.
When we come to these local content forums, though, I think sometimes local content is, we feel it's a us versus them type thing. When we hear about the contractors, the big guys, sometimes I feel at these conferences and even when we have discussions on it, we look at the big contractors, the big companies who are issuing those contracts. We look at them sometimes as the enemy. And I think we need to change how we approach these discussions because at the end of the day, both parties contribute to the development of this country. We're talking about the large contractors and the need for local content. I'll be honest with you from a business standpoint, and if you're taking empathy into play, some of these companies don't want to have to deal with local content, right? But what we've seen since the act has been put in place, these companies are more than willing to work with the private sector, work with the government of Guyana, work with agents. In fact, they've contributed significantly. We talk about the Center for Local Business Development. They've done a tremendous job. And a lot of the funding that comes towards that comes from these large contractors, the Exxons and et cetera, funding for some of these conferences that we go to. So, and they play a major role in the society, sponsorship. Some of these things, sometimes we miss them. And I think we have to recognize it requires a close partnership between both parties. And when it comes to local content, I know we like to say we have capacity. And sometimes we don't. Our private sector, we don't have some of the capacity. You'll hear all the talk about we can build this road or we can build this bridge or we can go and drill out there. We can do all of this. And I'll tell you, if we don't have the capacity training coming from some of those big contractors to our local private sector, you give them the contract and they can't execute it, they make it bad for everybody. And that's why this thing has to be a comprehensive discussions. We don't want to demonize any of the big major contractors when we have discussions on local content. And so far, from our end, Private Sector Commission, just remember, even those big contractors, they're also members of our private sector, so we advocate also on their behalf, while advocating on behalf of local companies benefiting from local content.
Thank you. I would offer one bit of wisdom to that. I think everybody has to know their role. If everybody lived in mansions, who would pick up the garbage? If everybody wanted to be the star of the show, who would set the stage? Who would do the costumes? Who would do the makeup? What good would be the show? And I think that that's the problem. You need to understand your role and where you fit. Too many people, it's like the trucking thing, right? Everybody's just focused in one area. So you fill a hole by digging another hole. So you're right, the strategy has to change. And guess what? I'm of a firm belief everybody wants the very same thing. They all want to win. The process and the methodology is very different because everybody may have the same goal, but they will not get to it the same way. And I think if you're working with each other, you'll keep the focus on collaboration. If you're working against each other, you're going to have a lot of contention. And collaboration can't happen where you have contention. So there's going to be things, it's like a relationship, right? How many of you are married or you're courting? Don't be ashamed. Come, put up your hands. But even if you're in a situationship that you don't want people to know, you know the first 6 months of any relationship is perfect. They dress up for you, they take you on dates, they tell you you're beautiful, and then it starts to dwindle. You don't get the messages every lunchtime. They don't tell you you're beautiful. You might cut your hair, they might notice. Guess what? That's just how life is. Attention fades until somebody realizes that you have to keep your finger on the button. All right? So if we want this to work, we all have to pull our weight. And that's why it's not that I want to glorify this summit or anything, but that's why it's so important that you get engaged with the discussion. You get engaged with the discussion and you understand that going out of this room from today, based on what these leaders have said, how can you support them? Talk with them. Okay, we have this challenge. We can help you in this. We got to help each other because I think there are how many ever billions of people on this planet? There are no two people that look exactly the same. They don't sound the same. They don't have the same ID. That means each of us have a unique role to play. So you need to think of that. What is your unique role in this equation? And how will you best serve the narrative going forward? Because if we come here next year and we're complaining about the very same thing, we have all failed. We don't have anybody to blame but ourselves. You have to spend less time complaining. Advocacy is not complaining. Advocacy is a well thought out cause and effect and solution process. So I hope that this will continue and that one day, maybe not tomorrow, not next year, we will be eating the fruits of this discussion. I want to thank everyone on the panel for their participation, especially the audience, because guess what? They called out the industry. Let me apologize to the industry. You are the last panel of the day. You stand between what can only be construed as a mild form of disaster for lunch and what we can only hope will be a better cocktail experience, which I can assure you will be, because we've taken matters into our own hands. But in between that, we must honor the industry, because they'll have a lot of the answers that you're looking for, right? So, thank you, panelists. If you would stick around, I'll be happy. I was actually saying that next year I will challenge the catering consortium to provide the catering so you don't have to deal with this oppression. Next, yeah, sometimes you got to call it. Hey, it is what it is. Sometimes you have to call things, don't be afraid to call it what it is. You don't need to dance around the issues. You can be diplomatic and be direct at the same time. Mr. Chapwania, are you ready? You have a challenge. But let's applaud them. They stayed in the room. They waited until the end. They listened to the endless ramblings, the excuses, the breaks, and so we must pay them honor. I would like to invite our panelists for our last panel of the day, our industry leaders, and I'm going to save the best for last. First, I want to invite Mr. Elchin. He's the head of supply chain manager at SLB. Mr. Elchin. I would like to invite Mr. Martin Chung, the country manager of SBM Offshore. Oh, it's the end of the day. Come on, come on. Clap, clap. That's right. I like it, I like it, I like it. You gotta trick this body. You gotta get into it. I would like to invite Mr. Vaman Jurai, country lead for Halliburton. Mr. John Rhodes, Baker Hughes. And I'm especially proud to announce this one. Many times when we go to forums and we ask ExxonMobil to speak, you see two people speaking. Phil or Alistair, Phil or Alistair, Phil or Alistair. I am so proud to announce that the representative of Exxon is not only a woman, but she's Guyanese. Their local content supervisor, Ms. Natina Singh. It's Natina, right? And I guess that's all I can say for this. Yeah, we win in. I really want to congratulate you. This really speaks to your commitment to the development of women and the promotion of locals within the space. So thank you. And I will invite the moderator, Mr. Chris Chapuana of Oil Now. He's no stranger to the oil and gas industry. When anything goes down in oil and gas, and you don't know, you want to know, if you're not following Oil Now, do it now. Chris?
Thank you. I need to use this. Good afternoon, panelists. Good afternoon to you. First off, I would like to thank you very much for remaining for this, the last panel of the day. I trust that you would have had a very interesting and informative day during the course of this, the third Local Content Summit. Interestingly, the last panel delved into quite a few of the challenges, issues, and opportunities too, being faced by local businesses. This panel is dealing with industry perspective. We will provide you with an opportunity to hear directly from the industry, including the operator and several of their prime contractors. Just before we delve into it, I'm going to make this a bit different in terms of how we approach considering the time of day, and provide you with a bit more of an opportunity in terms of time to ask questions. Before we delve into it, industry perspectives, and just to provide you with country perspectives. 10 years ago today, do you know what we were doing? Pretty much planning for our next election. What we were not doing 10 years ago is having a conversation about local content. In fact, the concept of local content here in Guyana was not that well known 10 years ago. And so from Lisa 1 to May of this year, that would be 10 years since the first discovery. Production started in 2019. You're looking at about 6 years of oil production. The conversations that we're having here in Guyana right now when compared to some of our closest neighbors, some who've been in the business for over 100 years, they were not even thinking about these things 10 years in. And so as we discuss and delve into challenges, we're moving at lightning fast speed here in Guyana, and so being able to adapt to it is also part of the challenge. So let's get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from the last panel, and we wanted to also provide the audience with some perspective as it relates to the industry operations and your individual and respective operations. Let me start off by asking the Local Content Act, as we've heard so much about today, 40 areas identified, an additional 27 I heard just a moment ago is being recommended by the private sector here in Guyana. How have you been able to navigate the local content legislation that is in place, particularly as it relates to some of the new requirements that we're now seeing regarding women in business, SMEs, women-led businesses itself being considered more to be included in the framework? So that's an open question. I'll throw it out to the panel. Go ahead.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, those two points really was not new for us. These are some areas we've been working on over the last few years, actually, with those work we had with the local content in previously. With regards to, first, let's talk about with female businesses. Actually, two of our major contracts, some of the biggest contracts actually locally is actually by females, right? They have been very, what should I say, we work very closely with them with regards to building talent, working closely with regards to how we develop their people and their skill set to match the requirement internationally. So actually, when we first started bidding, we had a lot of issues with getting actually contractors. And one of our contractor actually is female, so they do maintenance, facility, welding fabrication, so they play a big part of our business model. With regards to the small business, small is a relative number when it comes to the oil and gas industry when we define a small business. Some of the challenges that we see with a small business, especially you guys mentioned it before, it's with regards to insurances. Some of our contract model require, what should I say, elevated insurances and all the other terms and conditions that brings additional cost. That is some areas we're working on with the local suppliers, the smaller businesses, to see how we can make modifications to that, some concessions to give them that liberty to participate. Also, some of the small businesses is the challenge is financing. So we have done a lot of training, and I heard a lot of comments with regards to delayed payments. But a lot of times, those delayed payments is because the vendor themselves don't understand our process, our invoicing process. So we have spent a lot of time training them in how to maneuver the process and what are the touch points or who are the contacts should they have a delay in those payments. So financing and how we optimize our payments to help them grow faster, and also working with our internal processes with regards to contract. Those are some of the areas we work with. Small businesses, we looked at taxi service, catering, and actually some of the companies that did businesses with us, they consider us now too small for them. So they have grown a lot also, so we have also seen that. Thanks.
So for SLB, this is not new. We as a company, we always focus on diversification of our supplier base globally, and Guyana is not an exception. If we look, and we work with the Local Content Secretariat on a regular basis, making commitments in the development. I can say as a company, our ambition and target to grow the percentage of women-owned businesses and SMEs is in a range of 5 to 10% of new suppliers onboarding. And what we do, we actually also engage with them on a project-specific basis. So, and as an example, we do publish a lot of RFIs to the market. We we see the market is growing. We see a lot of more responses coming as a response to those RFIs from the local markets. And what we do, we actually have the face-to-face interaction with all the suppliers who are mostly new in the market, who won't have the appetite to grow the business, but they feel that the barriers to enter the work with a big company is too high for them and too costly for them. So we do encourage those conversations face-to-face on a project-specific basis. And as we mentioned, the cost of insurance in the standard industry, it is high, it is correct, and certain suppliers feel it as a barrier to the entry market. So we accommodate specific requirements for the locally certified suppliers as well. We work in line with the recommendations on the payment terms, which is 45 days and less. So there are all these aspects which we recognize as certain challenges to develop the local suppliers in the face-to-face engagement. And we hear those aspects to make sure that we incorporate in our process of supplier selection to encourage the new suppliers to lower the barrier to enter the market, operating with the oil service companies, and give opportunity for the local suppliers to grow.
All right, so from SBM Offshore standpoint, even before Local Content Act came into effect, we were applying local content principles. That allowed us to be one of the first companies to have our local content master plan, annual plan approved when the act came out. For us, going local, it just makes sense. Obviously, when you need work, you need services, you need it right away, especially when you're looking at production offshore, and at the levels that we're doing it, we need to make sure that services are just sourced locally so that we can respond very quickly and that there's no impact to the overall operations, particularly safety. And as it relates to focus on local content and specifically SME and women-owned, we have continuously executed a number of training programs. Even to the programs that we've run with kids, we've been able to identify that some of the young girls in our football program are interested in opening their own businesses, providing them with that skill set from an early age, having them have the entrepreneurial mindset from that onset. Those are some of the things that we've been doing. We've also significantly enhanced in terms of when we look at our commercial bid evaluation to take into account the guidelines that are outlined in the procurement guidelines issued by the Local Content Secretariat and applying that to give the advantage to local businesses, SMEs, as well as women-owned, and ensuring that is consistently applied at every RFP stage. And then also, we have our regular vendor days, and even most recently at the Energy Conference, we had the Let's Talk Local Content Forum, which allowed for entrants as well as existing customers to understand the procurement process and what is required, especially when it relies on HSSC compliance, human rights. And all of that has been encapsulated into the approach that we take in terms of encouraging local businesses.
From Baker Hughes's point of view, I think I'd like to follow up on the point Clinton made, which is basically, the Local Content Act came up in 2022. Similar to SBM, we were already in compliance with 16 of the sectors. As of today, we're fully in compliance with the 40 sectors that we are required. But it's sound business sense to shorten your supply chain and be able to get more responsive supply chains, i.e. grow local businesses. We don't need the Local Content Act necessarily to drive that behavior. It's already being driven just by business. It's a symbiotic relationship between the prime contractors, Exxon, and the local businesses. We need you, just like you need us, we need Exxon. It's all very much a partnership, a relationship together. We need each other at the end of the day. If we're successful, Exxon's successful, we're successful, we get more work, we provide more work for the local business. It's very much symbiotic. It shouldn't be adversarial. It should be more of a partnership. And I think, Clinton, you said that very clearly. The other thing we're doing is we're waiting for the new sectors to come out, to be announced, and the new percentages, but we're already in anticipation of that. We're trying to grow our local suppliers and anticipate which sectors so we can be fully compliant when that is announced. We're not going to wait. Why wait? Like I said, it makes business sense to use local suppliers well in advance of that. We don't need the new sectors to be told that it makes sense to do that. On the women-owned local suppliers, we've always been very keen to grow that part of our supply chain. We put a weighting when we do an RFI. We have a certain percentage weighting we give, and we give extra weighting to female-owned businesses. We spend, I think it's approximately $35 million a year in Guyana. Of that is 10% of that is spent on female-owned, female-owned businesses. So we believe we're well on the way. Obviously, we need to grow that, but we have a sizable chunk of our business goes to female-owned businesses. And I just want to touch on one point my colleague at the end brought up about payments. Yeah, payments can be challenging sometimes for local companies, but we do find we continually having to retrain the local businesses to use our systems. We have a global system. We don't have a dedicated different system for Guyana. We have a standard system. You supply your invoice, you have backups, you'll get paid on time. I do have, I'm not going to name names, but we do have local suppliers who just submit an invoice, no backups, no nothing. They get rejected. The system is automated. There's no backup, it just rejects it. So we do have to continue to train people. If you do submit valid invoices with backups, you'll get paid on time. It's just the nature of doing business, yeah. That's the expectation from our side, and we will provide training to anybody who doesn't understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chris, I like the fact that you backdrop that question with what we were doing 10 years ago, because I think we need to appreciate that we are flying the plane as we build the plane. And if you think back to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what would constitute a large business or a large industry, it would be a very different definition from what we're using today. So ExxonMobil recognized that coming into a country like Guyana, small and medium-sized businesses are what we had to hang our hat on because there wasn't anything larger necessarily. It is for this reason that we understand that early startups tend to fail within the first 3 years. And we have put a lot of focus in, not necessarily oil and gas, but generally the country as a whole. We've put a lot of focus in the Center for Local Business Development and the programs that we run through there because they are focused on women-owned and led businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, because we are interested in building capabilities and capacity for sustainability. It'll outlive us, right? And those are the kinds of things that we want to ensure that integrated into the oil and gas supply chain, but also being prepared for any other industry that may come to the shores of Guyana. We've got over 200 women that would have participated in the accelerator program over the years that we've had it. We've opened that up for the Elevate All, which is a small and medium-sized business specifically for different various industries. Those 200 women that have graduated or passed through those programs, we did a touch base with them a couple months after to find out, okay, how has this program benefited you? And the collective was an increase of $16 million in revenue. So, and that's, yes, US dollars. So it's working, and it's, like everyone said, it's a collective effort, and again, the pace that we're going at, the scale and pace of the oil and gas industry in this country is unprecedented. It's never happened before.
Thank you. So I want to delve in a bit more to what came up here, you touched on in response to the last panel. Relating to invoicing, this is a sore point, and we've heard from the beginning of this industry challenges as it relates to access to finance. Could you share with us some of the key challenges you see local companies face in terms of their submission of invoices? Errors, mistakes, whatever contributes to a process that is more extended than it should be. That's one. And two, some of the initiatives that you may be pursuing in terms of working with local companies to help them to understand the process better?
Okay, I'll start. I mean, from Baker's point, I think I already touched on it earlier. We provide training, regular training to our suppliers. We have a global payment called Ariba. It's called the Ariba system. We use it everywhere, and we continually retrain and train our local suppliers in Guyana how to use it. If the invoices are submitted and they have the correct backups, they're approved and they flow through the system like they do everywhere else in the world. I mean, if we didn't pay people on time, we wouldn't have people working for us. It's as simple as that. But we do have challenges with some local suppliers submitting invoices that are incorrect. They also, we see some of our local suppliers have high staff turnover, so we are having to retrain the same company when they have their staff turnover. Then we have to obviously retrain people. But it is a challenge. But the major initiative we have obviously is training, because our system works everywhere else. There's no reason it shouldn't work here as well, to paying people on time.
Echoing the same sentiments, training, continuous training. Simple stuff like having the purchase order on an invoice. If you don't have the PO on the invoice, we can't assign it to the contract that was issued to the company. So, something simple as that. We've actually, outside of just training and educating the vendors, we have a team of folks that are specifically dedicated to, once queries come in terms of challenges with the invoice or even the process, we have a team that looks at that and would respond and try to ensure that there's action from both internally the organization as well as with the vendor in terms of guiding them in terms of what is needed to correct any deficiencies on the submission. So that has been working, and at every opportunity that we have at a vendor day or at a forum to be able to provide guidance to vendors around the process and what that entails. Our finance team would come out, our supply chain would come out, and they do an excellent job in educating.
From our perspective, I think the more mature and more engaged we're with the supplier who've been working with us for quite a period of time, they now have a clear understanding how the invoicing process works and what the document needs to be supplied. So we don't see the issues with the mature suppliers, but where we see the repetitive issues with the newly onboarded suppliers, because the process in many cases is new to them. So we've learned from the past experience, and as part of the onboarding process, we have the engagement with suppliers before the contract execution starts to clearly set up, go through the documentation, the process, how invoicing should happen. As with many international companies, they try to outsource the services which engage with the transactional, and payment is part of that, right? But in Guyana, in SLB, we strategically keep the head count who interfaces with the suppliers on the payment issues in country. We have not outsourced it to our hubs, and that helps us for the suppliers to easily reach if they see concerns and if they see the late payment issue. So we have the point of contact at the country in the location to meet those requests in a timely manner and address them efficiently. And same what my colleagues shared, I mean, we do quarterly engagement with the suppliers where we present an update on the process to make sure that everyone who would like to refresh their knowledge, if they have in the suppliers organizations, they have a newcomer who is responsible for the invoices, that helps them to keep their staff updated with how the process should be managed. So those are the key initiatives we're taking in SLB to make sure that we address those questions and problems efficiently.
Quite similar, but we take another initiative is building closer relation with the vendors, make them feel comfortable with our team, that if they see their payments are running late, reach out. You don't need to wait 5-6 days. As soon as they see there's a delay payment, you reach out. We do a lot of training on that, especially I think reflect quite similar to SLB. The vendors who are more on a mature phase with us generally don't have that challenge. It's more from the newer ones entering to get familiar with the same Ariba system we use or online system for invoicing. And of course, everything is run by SAP and those payments are automatic. There's one other initiative we do is actually internal discipline with our team members. The oil and gas is a very dynamic operation, and many times you will need to call out a vendor to perform an operation and a PO is not ready. So what we try to do is minimize that or take immediate action upon that or after the event. So that's an internal discipline also we try to uphold and to prevent our guys to be always working on an emergency concept. Because to invoice, you need to have that PO, and we don't want the vendors delaying on that. So it's a bit of work we need to do also internally.
All right, so we have time for one more question to the panel before we open to Q&A. We've heard about partnerships and JVs and local companies in particular being in a better position to bid for and maybe win contracts if they're able to combine forces, combine their strength. Do you have a role, and if so, how do you support local companies in that process? There is a consortium as it relates to catering, a second one I heard announced today that is being put together. There are a number of JVs and other types of partnerships. Do you, as the oil and gas companies, the major companies in the sector, have a role to play in supporting and helping local companies to form those partnerships? And how are you doing so?
Yeah, so if some of the areas, and I'm going to special in two main areas, let's say machine shop, welding and fabrication, right? Where we have worked very closely with some of the local suppliers together with their partners or joint ventures to close their gap. So first of all, we identify some of the gaps that they have and how it's going to reach the qualification period to meet Halliburton standard. And vet some of the vendors or what should I say, their partners they're entering with and work closer with them. So easily working with them over time and building that capacity, training them, and in some cases we actually provide internal training for them with regards to HSE as well as service quality or even trade qualification. And we do have some of the local suppliers being qualified. Another area we're looking at right now is also the supply of chemicals, where we're working closely with local suppliers to see how they can enter that market. It's not an area, it's a new area, and there's something also we're working on. So we do work closely with them, filling the gaps and helping them to reach the standards that we're looking at.
Chemicals is a good example. I see in our industry, the challenge I see here, the lack of local suppliers who are providing chemicals, who store the chemicals here, because in the industry we operate, delivery times are very critical and important. So what we do in particular in that area, we are meeting with the local suppliers who partially provide certain chemical products to us, and we basically outline the demand on the chemical side. I mean, mostly commodity chemicals, what we need on a regular basis, and where the demand is more or less predictable. So that gives assurance to the local suppliers on not being scared to bring the right quantities in country and be sure that those can be sold at a later stage. So I would say chemicals is a good example. Another area which we look at the opportunity to help build the joint ventures is the global mobility services, where we have a need to always engage with the global suppliers who are helping the new people, new employees to come, deliver the personal goods, belongings, and things like that. We see, I mean, this is a regular demand in country, and we actually help our global mobility suppliers to build the JVs with the local suppliers who can help with the customs clearance services, who can help to bring the local expertise to streamline these processes. So those couple of examples I would like to bring as the efforts we do in building the JV environment in country.
So for us, we refer to it as smart partnership, and we've actually built it into our our plans that we submit to the Secretariat, and we set ourselves some targets around that to ensure that we are facilitating it. So we ensure that we would work with our OEMs and any other partner that we would source stuff from, and we encourage them to come in and explore opportunities in the country to look for partners, reaching out to the LCS as well as CLBD to look for those opportunities. And we also try to provide as much insight into the requirements, the standards, HSSC, specs, etc. The supply chain team would constantly be meeting with those vendors. I think most notable would have been with Clinton and the consortium there. When we were approached around the consortium being established, we quickly jumped on it and provided that. The team met with the vendors on multiple occasions, provided them with clarification, explanation, what was required, so that they can be informed as to what was required to make it a success, the consortium. And then obviously it took off from there. And I think that there is by itself a success story that we welcome more of.
I mean, from Baker's point of view, I think that to answer your question, yes. Similar to, I think, some of the other panelists, we're looking at historically where we provided services to Exxon directly through Baker Hughes. We're looking to set up joint ventures with local suppliers, local companies, and supply those services through those new organizations, those new JVs, basically. And we have very good, we have several opportunities at the moment we're following up. So yeah, to answer the question, yes, we do have a part to play in that.
I think Guyana is a good ecosystem for partnerships and collaboration simply because, like I said, it's unprecedented the level of activity that's happening here. It calls for a lot more holding hands or joining hands than standing alone in silos. Even across us as ExxonMobil and our contractors, there is a lot more closely working relationship and collaboration with just how we do business here in Guyana. And I think it's the part that we have to play as the operator is making sure that we provide environments where folks can share their stories, as we did with the panel, I think the panel before us, the full panel before us, Monish Schwartz and John Finance talking about two people who were on a different side of the fence coming together and collaborating, because it will take all of us to push this industry forward. The inward-outward missions that we have with our business associations, the smart partnership forums that we have running through the CLBD, all those things are just different forums that we can participate in. The Guyana Energy Conference, the Local Content Summit, the OTC, the Offshore Technology Conference is another one of those things where we're bringing people together and we're saying, hey, you don't have to go this road or this journey on your own. It's best if you have somebody with you.
Thank you, panelists. We'll now open the floor to questions. I can take about 2 quick ones.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Tariana, and I'm with the Brazilian Embassy. What I would like to know, we have been receiving a growing interest from various Brazilian companies in being able to join, in partnering with local companies to be able to offer services that they have offered for decades in Brazil. One of the things I would like to know so that I can facilitate this information is if the companies have a centralized location, a centralized website, or a person that may be able to give information on some of the services that you haven't been able to get locally, or maybe some of the particulars that are still missing. I know at the energy conference in the latter session, there was a moment where they spoke about some of the needs that aren't being met as yet, but I would like to know if there's another way that we could probably access it so that we can advise companies that are interested in partnering with local companies, what are some areas they can get into? Thank you.
So my first thing, Local Content Secretariat. Dr. Pratap has always reiterated whenever we meet with him, if there's an opportunity that a vendor wants inquiry, reach out to the Local Content Secretariat. They'll be able to provide the industry insight. And then following that, there's the Center for Local Business Development, who can also guide that conversation as well. So that's the main point of contact, and both organizations have line of sight into the prime contractors as well as the operator, and they can guide that conversation moving forward from there.
Thank you. We can take one more question. Okay, if no other question, I know that we're at the end of the day. I'd like to thank you all once again for remaining for this last session, and thank you panelists for another engaging conversation. Thank you all. Good evening.
I have fantastic news for you. Let me sit down to tell you this one. So, I personally, with my own 2 eyes, saw that the cocktail is ready. I checked it. I went to inspect it. And I can promise you this time, I am not selling you dreams. You'll be happy that you stayed. One thing though, the weather will not let us be great. Out there, it looks very windy, very cloudy, but the cocktail will be out on the terrace, so you can have a lovely view of the Marriott Beach skyline. Ladies, hold on to your lashes, hold your hair, hold down your dresses. Wait, I didn't say I could leave. Hold on. So that's what's coming next. But as we bring the curtains down on, let's be real, it was a good summit, right? Minus the things, right? Not because I organized the content of it, but I would rate it at a 4 out of 5. I mean, because there's room for improvement. I think it was high quality information. Would you agree? Yes. I would love to hear from you what you would like to hear in next year's summit. I know a lot of people have reached out already, but I can promise you next year will be even better than this year, and we won't be dancing around the issues. You know how I am. I ask for specific responses. Even if they are not given, I will ask. The other thing that we must give a moment to do is to give thanks. And I would like to invite Eslyn, is she here? Just so she can do a vote of thanks, especially to our sponsors. I won't come back. I would just say, save and accept the avoidable snafus. We had a great day, and I want to thank you for being here. And just so you know, when Eslyn is finished, you can, down the lobby, there's the door just by the gents' washroom that leads out to the Sea Breeze Terrace, and I tell you they call it Sea Breeze because it's for real sea breeze, where you can just relax, let your hair down or tie it up, whatever you feel like, and just chit-chat, have some fun, recap the day, clarify what you need to clarify, get to know each other, build relationships, and just have some fun. Eslyn?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. They tend to do this to me when you're all ready to leave at the edges of your seats. So please allow me 3 minutes to give thanks to some pivotal companies and persons that have contributed to making this a success. So it is my esteemed pleasure to say thank you to, first of all, His Excellency, who graced us with his presence today to be our keynote speaker. We would also like to thank the members of the diplomatic corps, ministerial candidates who were here, government representatives, of course, the Ministry of Natural Resources, Prestige Management Consultants, all speakers, panelists, the media, technical staff that worked tirelessly to keep us flowing today. A great big thank you goes out to our sponsors. We couldn't do this without you, so please allow me to mention them. ExxonMobil, of course. Anita just hinted how pivotal they've been to many of these events. Brava, CISPRO, SBM Offshore, Bono Energy, Bourbon Guyana, Eldorado Offshore, Shield Construction, Beacon Cafe, Acado, Deep Ocean, Rafik and Moore, MCCG Guyana. We, as I said before, couldn't do this without you. Of course, I would like to mention our team from MBW, who did an exceptional job for months putting this together. So team, thank you. It was a success in my book as well, in our book. So, as intended, today was filled with relevant information. Oh, I forgot somebody. I know I forgot somebody. Please allow me to extend our thanks to you exhibitors who spent the day displaying your products, services, what we're offering in this space. Thank you for taking time and for all the goodies that you've given us, all the pens we're going home with and whatnot. And of course, our alliances, the Private Sector Commission, Oral Now, Women in Energy, and CLBD. CLBD like to clap hard. Hi, CLBD. So please feel free to enjoy what we are offering now. Thank you. Have a safe and a good evening. Enjoy.